"You're not challenging enough for me anymore," she said during an argument. I nodded and walked away without fighting. Months later, she tried reaching out after realizing peace was more valuable than whatever she chose instead. "You're not challenging enough for me anymore." She said it like she was returning a shirt that didn't fit. Not screaming it. Not crying it. Just saying it. Flat. Calm. Like she'd been rehearsing it in the shower for weeks and had finally gotten the delivery right. I stood there in the middle of our kitchen, the one we'd spent 3 weekends painting together because Serafina had changed her mind about the color twice, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not break. Shift. Like a gear that had been grinding for months finally slipped into a different position. And I just nodded. I was 31. She was 29. We weren't kids experimenting with love. We were supposed to be building something permanent. And I remember thinking, even as I walked away from her that night, that something irreversible had just happened in that kitchen. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. We'd been together for years. Met at a gallery opening in Chelsea. Mutual friend, bad wine. A conversation about a painting neither of us actually liked, but both pretended to. Serafina was sharp, beautiful, restless. I was steady, focused, building something quietly. For a long time, that balance worked. The first year was effortless. I know everyone says that, but with her, it genuinely was. She was the kind of person who made ordinary moments feel like they mattered. A Tuesday night grocery run became a competition over who could find the most absurd snack combination. A power outage became a 2-hour conversation by candlelight about things we'd never told anyone. She had this energy, this pull, and I fell into it completely. The second year, we moved in together. Her idea, my hesitation, our decision. The apartment on the Upper West Side. The radiator. The brick wall. The life we started assembling piece by piece. By year 3, something had quietly changed. I couldn't name it then, but looking back now, I can see exactly where the hairline fracture started forming. She started getting restless. Not with me specifically, just restless. She took on more freelance projects. Started going out more with a new circle of friends I didn't know well. Started coming home with a different kind of energy. Not bad energy, just different. Like she was running towards something I couldn't see. I noticed, but I didn't push. That was probably my first mistake. Not asking questions. Assuming silence meant okay. Because in my experience, when something is actually okay, people don't need to perform how okay it is. And Serafina had started performing okay. Let me tell you about Torrance first, because this story doesn't fully make sense without him. Torrance was someone she'd met through that new circle of friends. He showed up in her stories sometime around the beginning of year 4. Artsy photos. Niche opinions about things. The kind of guy who made a personality out of being difficult to read. I noticed him the way you notice a sound that doesn't quite belong in the background of a familiar room. Not alarming. Just present. I asked about him once. Casually. She said he was interesting. Interesting how? I asked. She smiled. Just interesting. That was the end of that conversation. And I let it be. Again, silence assumed to mean okay. The argument that produced that line wasn't even about Torrance. It started about something small. I think it was about plans. She'd said we were doing one thing. I'd made separate plans assuming something different, and it turned into one of those circular arguments that isn't actually about the plans at all. It's about something underneath. Something neither person wants to name directly. We went back and forth for maybe 20 minutes. And I remember feeling tired. Not angry. Tired. Like I'd been running a race and suddenly couldn't remember why I'd entered it. Not as a tactic. Not to punish her. Just because I had nothing left to say that felt worth saying. And that's when she said it. You know what the problem is? You're not challenging enough for me anymore. I looked at her. She held my gaze. And I understood, with complete clarity, that she hadn't just come up with that line in the heat of the argument. She'd thought about it. Sat with it. Shaped it carefully. And chosen tonight to finally say it out loud. I nodded. And I walked away. I went into the second bedroom, the one we used as a home office, and I sat down in the dark. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't pick up my phone. I just sat there with the city noise bleeding through the window, and I thought about what she'd actually said. Not challenging enough. As if I was a puzzle she'd already solved. As if 4 years of a life built together had been some kind of intellectual exercise, and I'd gotten too easy. And the more I sat with it, the less it felt like an insult about me. The more it felt like a confession about her. Because here's the thing, and I say this without bitterness now, Though that night I wasn't quite there yet. I hadn't changed. Not fundamentally. I was the same person she'd fallen for at that gallery. Steady. Focused. Not flashy. Not performing. Not manufacturing drama to stay interesting. I had, apparently, become predictable. And she had, apparently, decided that predictability was a flaw. She knocked on the office door around midnight. I said, "Come in." She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Not aggressive. More like she was holding herself together. "Are we going to talk about this?" she asked. "What would you like to say?" I asked back. She looked at me like she'd expected something different. Like she'd been braced for an argument, and I'd just handed her silence instead. I feel like we've stopped growing," she said. "You specifically or us?" Pause. "Both." I nodded again. "Okay. That's it. Okay. What do you want me to say, Serafina?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. "I don't know," she finally said. And that, right there, told me everything I needed to know. She didn't have a vision for what she wanted from me. She just knew she wanted something different. And something different had a name. And that name was Torrance. I didn't say that out loud. Not that night. Maybe I should have. But I wasn't ready to say the true thing yet. And truthfully, I don't think she was ready to hear it. So we went to bed that night with the argument technically unfinished. Two people lying next to each other in the dark, both awake, neither speaking. I stared at the ceiling. She stared at her phone. The radiator clanged at 2 a.m., right on schedule. Neither of us laughed. The next 2 weeks were a particular kind of quiet that couples who've been together long enough will recognize immediately. Not fighting. Not cold. Just managed. Polite. Performatively normal in a way that's somehow worse than open conflict. She cooked. I cleaned up. We watched things in the evenings. We talked about surface things. And underneath all of it ran this current of something unsaid that we were both choosing to step over instead of address. I used that time to think. Not to plot. Not to prepare for a confrontation. Just to genuinely sit with the question she'd handed me. Was I not challenging enough? And if I was honest, and I was trying to be, because there's no point being dishonest with yourself, it just delays the reckoning. I could see what she meant. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't create tension. I didn't pick fights to keep things electric. I wasn't unpredictable. I was consistent. I showed up. I followed through. I was, by most reasonable definitions, a good partner. But Serafina, I was realizing, had started to confuse consistency with complacency. Had started to read reliability as lack of ambition. Had started to look at my steadiness and see stillness instead of strength. And there was nothing I could do about that. Because I wasn't going to manufacture chaos just to seem more interesting. I wasn't going to become someone else to hold someone who'd stopped wanting who I actually was. About 10 days after the argument, I came home and found her at the kitchen table with her laptop open, FaceTime call going. She looked up when I walked in, said something quickly to whoever was on the screen, closed the laptop. "Who was that?" I asked. "Torrance," she said. Like it was nothing. Like it was obvious. Like saying his name in our kitchen on a Tuesday evening was a completely ordinary thing. "We were just talking about a project," she added. I set my bag down, went to the kitchen, made tea, said nothing. And I think my silence scared her more than any accusation would have. That night she came to find me. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked. "About what?" I said. "About Torrance." "What about him?" "You're not bothered?" I looked at her carefully. "Should I be?" I asked. And there it was again. That pause. That moment where she had to decide what she actually wanted to admit. "No," she said. But the word came out wrong. Too fast. Too flat. The word of someone answering a question before they've let themselves fully think about it. And I nodded. And I let the silence hold. I want to be honest about something here. Because I've told pieces of this story to a few people and they always ask the same thing. "Why didn't you fight for her?" And I always have to pause before I answer. Because the honest answer is more complicated than it sounds. It's not that I didn't want to fight for the relationship. It's that fighting for a relationship, real fighting, the productive kind, requires two people who both believe there's something worth fighting for. And by the time she said that thing in the kitchen, I wasn't sure she believed that anymore. And I wasn't willing to argue my way into being wanted. That's not a battle you win. That's a battle that just makes you smaller every time you enter it. I'd watched other people fight that way. Pull and push and plead and negotiate their way into being tolerated by someone who had already emotionally left. And it never ended well. It just extended the pain. So I chose something else. I chose silence. Not the cold, punishing kind. The clear kind. The kind that says, I see what this is, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. 2 weeks after the Torrance FaceTime call, she told me she needed space. She used the word space, the way people use it when they mean something else, but aren't ready to say it yet. I asked her to define it. She said she didn't want a label on it. I said that wasn't a good enough answer. We were in the living room. Late evening. City lights coming through the window. I think, she said slowly, that I need to figure some things out. About what? About us. About me. About what I want. And Torrance. I said. She looked at the floor. That was the first real answer she'd given me in months. Not words. Just a look at the floor. And something in me went very, very quiet. I packed a bag that night. Not everything. Just what I needed for a while. I stayed at Marcellus's place. My college friend had a second bedroom, asked no questions that first night. Just handed me a beer and put on something mindless on TV and let me exist in the quiet of being somewhere that wasn't soaked in whatever was happening in that apartment. I slept better than I had in months, which told me something. The formal conversation happened a week later. We met at the apartment, her space technically, since she'd stayed, and sat across from each other like two people in a negotiation neither of them wanted to win. She looked tired. Not guilty. Just tired. Like the weight of the weeks had gotten heavier instead of lighter. I think we both know this has run its course, she said. I nodded. I don't want to hurt you, she said. You already have, I said. Not bitterly. Just factually. She nodded. I know. And I'm sorry. I believed her. Mostly. I believed the sorry was real. What I wasn't sure about was whether she fully understood what she was sorry for. Whether she was sorry for hurting me, or sorry for what she was about to choose instead. Those are two very different kinds of sorry. We split quietly. No big explosion. No courtroom drama. I took my things over a weekend. She took a trip somewhere with friends that same weekend, deliberately, I think, to make the logistics easier for both of us. And when I walked out of that apartment for the last time with the last box, I stood for a second in the hallway and I thought about the people we'd been when we first walked into it together. Carrying furniture up 3 flights of stairs. Laughing at something. The version of us that had no idea what we were walking into. I thought about them for just a second. And then I picked up the box. And I took the stairs. The next few months were not a montage of self-improvement. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to tell you I immediately hit the gym and journaled my way to enlightenment and emerged 6 weeks later glowing with inner peace. There were bad nights. There were nights I picked up my phone and almost texted her. Not because I wanted her back, necessarily, but because grief doesn't always know the difference between missing a person and missing the version of your life that included them. I missed the Saturday farmer's market. I missed the radiator clanging at 2 a.m. I missed having someone to tell small things to. But I didn't miss the version of myself I'd been becoming in the last year. Quieter than necessary. Smaller than necessary. Always slightly braced for the next thing she'd decide was wrong with me. That version, I did not miss. I moved into my own place about 2 months after the split. A smaller apartment than I was used to. But it was mine. Every choice in it was mine. The coffee brand. The furniture placement. The silence or the music whenever I wanted either. I started working more, not as a distraction, but because I'd been holding back on a project for over a year, letting the fog of the relationship's last chapter cloud my focus. With the fog gone, the work came back. Cleanly. Sharply. I reconnected with Marcellus properly, not just as a couch to crash on, but as a friend I'd been letting slide. Bramwell too, another old friend I'd drifted from. I got back into running. Not for transformation. Just because I'd always liked it, and I'd stopped. And slowly, not dramatically, not with a single defining moment, I started to feel like myself again. Not a new self. The actual self. The one that had been there all along, just buried under 4 years of bending to someone else's definitions of what I should be. Torrance lasted about 3 months. I heard it from Marcellus, who had a peripheral connection to that social circle. Didn't ask for the details. But I got the broad strokes anyway. Torrance, apparently, was challenging in all the ways she'd claimed to want. Unpredictable. Sharp. Full of edges. Also, apparently, unable to commit to a dinner reservation, let alone a relationship. Chronically unavailable. Brilliantly selfish. The kind of interesting that looked like depth from a distance and turned out to be mostly surface when you got close enough to see clearly. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing this. I want to be honest about that too. There's a version of this story where I tell you I felt vindicated. And sure, somewhere in me, something recognized the irony. You traded steady for interesting. And interesting turned out to be a lease with impossible terms. But mostly I just felt nothing. Which, if you've ever been properly through a grief cycle, you know is actually progress. Nothing is not indifference. Nothing is the absence of pain. And the absence of pain felt, at that point, like something close to peace. The first contact came about 4 months after we split. A text. Simple. Hey, hope you're doing okay. I read it. Put my phone face down. Made coffee. Went for a run. Came back. Made breakfast. Got to work. Responded that evening. Doing well. You. 3 words. Then nothing for a while. The second contact came about 6 weeks later. A longer message this time. Said she'd been thinking. Said she hoped we could catch up someday. Said she missed talking to me. I read it twice. Not because I was confused about what it meant, but because I wanted to be honest with myself about how it made me feel before I responded. And what it made me feel was careful. Not cold. Not excited. Careful. The way you feel when you see a door that used to mean home, and you're not sure anymore what's on the other side of it. I responded politely. Something neutral. Said things were going well. Didn't invite more. The third contact was a phone call. About 2 months after the second text. I let it go to voicemail. Not deliberately ignoring her. I was genuinely in the middle of something. But I also sat with the voicemail icon for about 20 minutes before I decided to listen. Her voice on the recording was different from how I remembered it. Softer. Something tired in it. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. Said she wanted to apologize properly. Said she'd been wrong about some things. Said she hoped I'd be willing to meet for coffee and just talk. No pressure. Just talk. I sat with it for 3 days. And I talked to Marcellus about it, which I don't usually do. I tend to process things alone. But this felt like a decision that deserved a second perspective. What do you want to happen? He asked. I'm not sure, I said. Do you want her back? I thought about it honestly. I want to know if she actually understands what happened, I said. And if she doesn't, then the conversation will be short. He looked at me for a second. You're calmer about this than I expected, he said. What did you expect? I don't know. More something. I've had months, I said. And that was true. Months of waking up in a space that was entirely mine. Months of mornings without bracing for what version of her would emerge that day. Months of remembering what it felt like to simply be without justifying the way I was being. I had done the work. Quietly. Without announcing it to anyone. And what I'd found on the other side of that work was not bitterness. Was not some triumphant story of self-reinvention. Was just clarity. Clean, quiet clarity about who I was and what I needed and what I would and would not accept in my life. I texted her back. Said I'd meet for coffee. One condition, just conversation. No expectations attached. She said of course. We set a time. The coffee shop was neutral ground. Her suggestion, actually, which I appreciated. Somewhere in Midtown neither of us had a particular history with. I got there first. Ordered. Found a corner table. And I noticed something interesting while I waited. I wasn't nervous. Not the way I used to get nervous before difficult conversations with her, when I'd be running through possible things she might say and possible ways I might respond. I was just present, sitting with my coffee, watching the door. Calm. She looked good. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But she also looked different in a way that went beyond appearance. She looked like someone who'd been through something. Not broken. Like a few of the edges she'd been using as armor had been filed down by circumstance. She sat down. We did the small talk for maybe 2 minutes. And then she looked at me and said, I need to tell you I'm sorry. I waited. Not the automatic kind, she said. I know what I did. I know how I said it. And I know you didn't deserve that. I nodded. The thing in the kitchen, I said. That, and a lot of things before it, she said. What changed? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. I realized I was chasing something that I thought was depth, she said slowly. And it wasn't. Torrance, I said. Not a question. She nodded. He was everything I told myself I needed, she said. And you found out what that actually looked like, I said. Yeah. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I kept telling myself you were too settled, she said. And I know how that sounds now. How does it sound now? I asked. Like I was confusing stability for stagnation, she said. Like I didn't know what I actually had. I let her talk. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. There's something specific and particular about sitting across from someone who hurt you and watching them finally understand how. It's not satisfying the way you imagine it will be. It's not a victory. It's just truth arriving late. Better late than never, maybe, but still late. I'm not sure what I'm asking for, she said eventually. I'm not asking you to take me back. I just needed you to know that I understand. What I said, what I chose, what I walked away from. I looked at her for a moment. I know, I said. You knew before I did, she said. I suspected, I said. When you walked away that night. You didn't argue. You didn't try to convince me I was wrong. Would that have helped? I asked. She shook her head slowly. No, she said. I wasn't ready to hear anything then. I know, I said again. We talked for almost 2 hours. And here's what I can tell you honestly about those 2 hours. It was the best conversation we'd had in probably 18 months. Because it was the first one in that long that was completely honest. No performance. No positioning. No one trying to win something. Just two people on the other side of something difficult finally being straight with each other. I felt something during that conversation. Warmth, maybe. The residual warmth of 4 years that had genuinely meant something, even if they'd ended badly. But I also felt something else underneath the warmth. A kind of settled finality. A quiet, unshakable sense that this chapter was closed. Not in an angry way. Not in a grieving way. Just closed. The way a wound doesn't ache when it's fully healed. You can touch it. You can remember that it was there. But it doesn't hurt anymore. At the end of the coffee, she asked me directly, "Do you think there's any chance for us?" I didn't rush the answer. I let the question sit for a second. "I think you learned something real," I said. "And I think that matters. But I'm not who I was 4 years ago. And I'm not even who I was a year ago. And the truth is, I've built something in these months that I'm not willing to dismantle. Not for a chance at something. I need certainty now. I'm past the age of maybe." She nodded, eyes a little wet. "Not arguing." "That's fair," she said. And I believe she meant it. Here's the thing about peace that I don't think people talk about honestly enough. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It doesn't look like a breakthrough moment. It doesn't feel, from the inside, like winning. It feels like quiet. Like an absence of the particular noise you'd been living inside of for so long you'd stopped noticing it. I'd spent the last year of that relationship walking around with this constant, low-level hum of tension in my chest. This background radiation of not quite being okay. Always slightly braced. Always slightly small. And when I walked away from that kitchen that night, when I nodded and didn't fight, I didn't walk toward peace immediately. I walked through a lot of hard and quiet first. But I walked through it. On my own terms. Without performing my pain for anyone. Without turning her into a villain so I could feel less like a fool. Without waiting for an apology before I decided to be okay. I built my peace myself. And that peace, by the time she came back reaching for something, had made me into someone who genuinely didn't need what she was offering. Not out of pride. Not out of revenge. Just because I'd moved far enough forward that going back would have required choosing to be less than what I'd become. And I wasn't willing to do that. For anyone. There's one more thing. About 3 weeks after that coffee, I was running early on a Saturday morning through Central Park. The light the way it gets sometimes in late fall, low and gold and slanted through the trees in a way that makes even the city feel quiet. And I thought about the version of me standing in that kitchen. Not challenging enough, she'd said. And I thought about all the ways I could have responded to that. Argued. Defended. Dismantled myself and rebuilt into something more exciting, more volatile, more difficult to read. I thought about the fact that I'd chosen silence instead. Just a nod. Just walking away. And I thought, running through that gold light on a Saturday morning, with no one waiting on me and nothing to brace against, and my whole day entirely mine, I thought. That nod was the most articulate thing I ever said to her. Because what it meant was, I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. And I'm not going to argue for my own value to someone who's already decided I don't have any. She found peace eventually too. I heard that. Not through channels I was tracking, just the peripheral way you hear things in a connected city. Good. She deserved to find it. The version of her that sat across from me at that coffee shop and said what she said, that person deserved something real. But here's what I also know. She found it after. After the thing she chose instead ran its course. After the interesting became exhausting. After the challenging became corrosive. After she'd seen, up close, what it actually looks like when someone treats love like a competition they're not sure they want to win. And then she remembered what it felt like to have someone who just showed up. Consistently. Without drama. Without games. Without needing to manufacture tension to feel alive. She remembered. And I hope that memory serves her well. I genuinely do. I don't tell this story to make her the villain, or to make myself the hero. I tell it because I think there are people reading this who are standing in their own kitchen right now, hearing something like what she said, and wondering if they should fight back, if they should argue, if they should perform, if they should make themselves smaller or larger or different to hold on to something that's already decided to go. And to those people, I just want to say, your silence can be the most powerful sentence you ever speak. Your stillness can be the most decisive action you ever take. And walking away, when you do it with clarity, not fear, is not a loss. She reached out 6 months after that kitchen. I was fine. I was more than fine. I was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely, quietly, completely okay. And okay, when you've earned it. It's different than anything she ever offered me instead.